3:47 a.m. Secret Service agents rushed a poisoned four-star general into the ER, his body convulsing from a toxin the blonde rookie nurse identified instantly using classified chemical markers. When the CIA investigated her credentials, they found nothing. No birth certificate, no social security number, no proof she existed. The agent told the director, "The woman who saved him does not exist." At that exact moment, she walked in wearing scrubs, coffee in hand, and smiled. "You're looking for me?" She stood still as the agent's hand drifted toward his weapon. 3 floors above, the general was dying from a Russian toxin so classified it had no name, only a number. She knew the molecular structure, the antidote, the origin facility. The agent demanded who she worked for. She checked her watch, 12 hours until the poison becomes irreversible. 12 hours to trust a woman who never officially drew breath. Then the general stirred and whispered her real name. The name hung in the air between them. 2 syllables. A sound the CIA agent recognized from a red folder he wasn't cleared to open 7 years ago. The general's eyes fluttered open, bloodshot but lucid, fixing on the blonde nurse with a recognition that transcended the morphine haze. "You came," he rasped. The agent's radio crackled. "Director wants her contained," but the nurse didn't move. She placed 2 fingers on the general's wrist, checking a pulse that was fading, and whispered back, "I told you never to say it aloud." 12 hours. That was the window. The toxin was a Russian design from the 1980s, a binary compound that activated in stages, first convulsions, then paralysis, then cardiac arrest. Military hospitals kept antidotes for standard chemical weapons. This wasn't standard. This was SVR heritage, a signature reserved for high-value targets in proxy wars. The CIA agent Marcus Reed had seen it once before in Prague. The diplomat had died in 6 hours. The general was entering hour 3. Reed stepped closer, blocking the door. "You know the compound. You know the timeline. That makes you either an asset or a threat." The nurse pulled a syringe from her pocket. Not hospital issue, something she had produced from her locker. The liquid inside was amber, viscous. "The antidote requires a stabilizer that doesn't exist on any pharmaceutical database," she said, "because I synthesized it in the basement lab 20 minutes ago using kitchen bleach and epinephrine stolen from the crash cart. The math is classified at the highest level." Reed's hand hovered near his sidearm. "Who taught you that math?" She looked down at the dying man. He did. 19 years ago in a bunker outside Langley. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The hospital director, a civilian named Harlow who had been trying to reach Homeland Security, finally pushed through the door. "The room is compromised," Reed snapped. "Get out!" But Harlow had papers in his hand, shaking. "The FBI just sent this. They ran her prints through every database, Interpol, NATO, even the old Soviet records. Nothing. She doesn't exist. The nurse didn't look up. She was calculating dosages, adjusting for the general's weight and kidney function. I exist," she said quietly. "I just don't leave footprints. The story of how a 19-year-old anthropology student from Vermont became a ghost began with a car accident. Or that's what the file said. She had been brilliant, isolated, multilingual, orphaned. The general, then a colonel running Black Ops recruitment, had identified her in a CIA talent search. She had a gift for biochemistry and a profile so clean it was invisible. No boyfriends, no debts, no digital trail. Perfect for a program called Ghost Orchid. They faked her death, gave her new skin, erased her from birth certificates, school photos, even her childhood dentist's records. For 10 years, she operated in 30 countries. No name, no nationality, just a number and a vial. Reed felt the room tilting. Ghost Orchid was a myth, a billion-dollar boogeyman used to scare congressional oversight committees, but the general was whispering again, confirming everything. She saved the Kremlin defector in Kiev, he wheezed. She identified the Tehran poison before the ambassador drank it. "She's the reason I'm still breathing." The nurse adjusted the IV. "You taught me to see the patterns, sir. Now stop talking. You need to conserve oxygen." But the general grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "They know you're here," he said. "The ones who did this. They wanted you to reveal yourself." The heart monitor flatlined. Her training took over. She shoved the amber syringe into the central line, ignoring Reed's shout, ignoring the director's panic. "Clear." She commanded, though no one had called a code. The shock of epinephrine hit the general's system like lightning. His body arched off the bed. The monitor showed a chaotic rhythm. Ventricular fibrillation. She grabbed the paddles, charged to 300. Reed stared. "You're not a doctor." "No," she said. "I'm the only person in this building who knows what he took, and I'm the only one who can fix it." The defibrillator charged with a high-pitched whine. She placed the pads with precision that came from field surgery in war zones that officially had no American presence. "Now," she said, and the general's body convulsed. The line settled, sinus rhythm, weak, but there. She exhaled, her hands trembling for the first time. 12 hours just became 6. The toxin is adapting. Reed's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and the color drained from his face. The security footage from the cafeteria, the man who poisoned him. "He's not Russian, he's one of ours, and he's still in the building." She ripped off her gloves. "Where?" Reed looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a new understanding. "He's disguised as a trauma surgeon. He's heading toward this room." She moved to the cabinet, retrieving a scalpel with a casual familiarity that terrified everyone watching. "Then we finish this tonight," she said. "But when I walk out of here, you need to decide, Agent Reed. Am I the asset you control, or the ghost you let disappear? Because I can't be both." The door handle turned from the outside. She vanished into the shadows beside the crash cart, blade ready, just as the lights flickered and died. The darkness was absolute. The door swung open, admitting the chemical smell of the corridor and the silhouette of a man in bloodied surgical scrubs. "Trauma team," he called out, hands raised. I heard the code blue, but the nurse wasn't looking at him. She was looking up. The ceiling tile shifted. A figure dropped from the ventilation duct. Black tactical gear absorbing the impact with a gymnast's grace, suppressed pistol already tracking toward the general's bed. The surgeon in the doorway wasn't the threat. He was the distraction. Reed fired twice. The figure rolled, bullets sparking off the bed rail, and came up in a combat crouch. The nurse moved. She didn't reach for the fallen scalpel. She reached for the IV pole, snapping it free from its mount with a sharp crack of aluminum. She swung it like a staff, catching the gun wrist, and the weapon spun across the floor. They clashed in the half-light, two trained killers, recognizing each other's economy of motion. He was faster, younger, but she knew the hospital's geometry. She drove him backward into the crash cart, glass shattering, and found the brachial nerve cluster with her thumb. He stiffened, gasped, and collapsed. Emergency generators kicked in. Harsh red light flooded the room. The attacker was 40-ish, lean, with a faded tattoo on his neck that Reed recognized immediately. Spetsnaz, Russian Special Forces. But when Reed checked the man's pockets, he found a Maryland driver's license, a Pentagon contractor badge, and a key card for a private security firm headquartered in McLean. "He's American," Reed said, "or he was." The nurse checked the general. His breathing had gone shallow, arrhythmic. She examined the IV line and cursed softly. The antidote was crystallizing in the tubing, reacting with something in the plastic. "This wasn't designed to cure," she said. "It was designed to delay, to keep him alive long enough." "Long enough for what?" Reed asked. She looked at the unconscious assassin, then at the clock on the wall. 4 hours until the toxin reaches terminal saturation. 4 hours until he becomes contagious. The surgeon in the doorway, forgotten until now, stepped forward with the tablet clutched in shaking hands. "Security footage," he whispered, "loading dock." 40 minutes before the general arrived, the screen showed a catering truck, white and unmarked. A worker in a hairnet pouring a clear liquid into the coffee urn marked for the medical staff lounge. The nurse felt ice in her veins. She turned to the general, understanding finally dawning. He wasn't the primary target. He was the vector. Downstairs, 300 military doctors, nurses, and administrators were gathered for the annual Armed Forces Medical Conference. The general had been transferred here specifically because of that concentration of expertise. The poison in his bloodstream wasn't just a toxin. It was a biological delivery system designed to mutate in the presence of adrenaline and fear, becoming airborne through sweat and exhalation. A hospital full of the country's top military medical minds, infected simultaneously, would cripple the military's response capability for decades. And the assassin hadn't come to finish the general. He had come to ensure the general survived long enough to reach the operating room, where the stress of surgery would trigger the mutation. Reed's radio crackled. "Director on the line, stand down order effective immediately. Transfer the general to Bethesda Naval Hospital. Chopper arrives in 20, full medical escort required." The nurse looked up sharply. "No, they can't move him. The stress of transport will activate the secondary phase." Reed lowered his voice. "They're not asking. They're telling, and they know you're here. They want you on that chopper too. She understood then the poisoning wasn't Russian. It wasn't even enemy action. It was a domestic operation. Someone inside the intelligence community had authorized the murder of 300 medical personnel to cover the elimination of one man. The general knew something that couldn't be allowed to survive in any database, any debrief, any testimony, and she was the loose end they intended to tie up along with him. She moved to the window, third floor. Below, she could see the rooftop landing pad preparations, the Marines securing the perimeter, but she also saw the catering trucks, still parked by the loading dock, and men in chemical suits unloading canisters marked with biohazard symbols that weren't standard military issue. They weren't here to decontaminate. They were here to ensure the spread happened exactly as planned, then blame it on a Russian terrorist attack. The unconscious assassin groaned, stirring. She knelt beside him, checking his pupils. He was dosed with the same chemical class as the general, a lighter variant, a carrier dose. He was meant to survive, meant to be captured, meant to confess to being a Russian asset. The perfect patsy. She looked at Reed, really looked at him, and saw the same calculation in his eyes. "If I go with them," she said, "I die in a helicopter crash over the Potomac. If I stay, I'm a fugitive with no identity. No resources in 4 hours to synthesize a cure for a weapon that doesn't officially exist." Reed holstered his weapon. 3 hours and 40 minutes, he corrected. "And you're not staying here," she raised an eyebrow. "You're helping me?" He tossed her the assassin's keycard. "I'm helping the truth. I didn't join the agency to kill doctors." They moved the general not toward the roof, but toward the service elevators, the ones that went to the sub-basement where the old pathology labs had been sealed since the building's renovation. The nurse knew those labs. She had used them before, in another life, to cook poisons for governments that denied her existence. The general stirred as they rolled him through the empty corridors, his eyes finding hers in the dim emergency lighting. "You shouldn't have come back," he whispered. She pushed the elevator button for the lowest level. "You shouldn't have drunk the coffee." The doors closed, the elevator descended, and in the pocket of the assassin's tactical vest, a transmitter blinked red, sending a signal that would bring a kill team to the basement in exactly 18 minutes. The nurse checked her watch, then checked the general's pulse. She had 3 hours to save 300 lives, starting with the man who had made her a ghost, and she had to do it in a laboratory that hadn't been stocked in 10 years. With the CIA hunting her from above and a biological time bomb breathing slowly beside her. The elevator touched bottom with a soft chime. The doors opened onto darkness. She stepped out first and smelled ozone. Someone was already down here. Someone who had been waiting. The figure in the darkness didn't move like a threat. He moved like furniture that had been waiting decades for someone to notice it. The emergency lights flickered on, revealing a man in his 60s, silver hair cropped close, wearing a cardigan that belonged in a university lecture hall, not a sub-basement kill zone. The Admiral, he sat in a wheelchair that hadn't creaked once in 10 years of occupancy, holding a tablet displaying thermal imaging of the entire hospital complex. "Hello, child," he said. "You took the scenic route." Reed's weapon came up instinctively, but the nurse placed her hand on the slide before he could chamber around. "He's not the enemy," she said quietly. "Not tonight." The Admiral smiled, tapping the tablet. "The kill team is 18 floors up, breaching the main security office. They'll have the cameras looped in 90 seconds, which means we have 89 to decide whether 300 doctors live or die." He wheeled backward, revealing a wall of monitors that shouldn't exist beneath a civilian hospital. "Ghost Orchid never closed," he continued. "We just changed the sign on the door." The general stirred on the gurney, his eyes finding the Admiral with a hatred that transcended the poison. "You promised." The general rasped. "You promised you'd burn the files." The Admiral's expression didn't change. "I promised I'd protect the country. After 9/11, that required new vaccines, new defenses." The general laughed, a wet, dying sound. "You built a bioweapons program in VA hospitals. You used veterans as test subjects." The nurse looked between them, understanding finally crystallizing. "The toxin wasn't Russian. It was domestic. Batch number 619er. She'd seen the file in Kiev, the one marked for destruction." The Admiral nodded, impressed. "Clever girl. 619er wasn't designed to kill. It was designed to inoculate a genetic marker that lays dormant until activated by specific stress hormones. The conference upstairs isn't a target, it's a garden. 300 of the country's finest medical minds, seated with a pathogen that can be triggered remotely by satellite pulse. Instant loyalty, instant compliance, or instant cardiac arrest. The military's solution to battlefield psychology, and the general was going to testify before the Armed Services Committee in 48 hours. The admiral spread his hands. So we gave him a reason to stay quiet. Reed stepped forward, his face pale. The helicopter on the roof, the stand-down order. The admiral smiled. Distractions. The real operation happens when the general dies in surgery, releasing the active strain into the ventilation system. Everyone upstairs becomes a carrier. They go home to their families, their private practices, their teaching hospitals. Within a month, the entire military medical establishment is manageable. The nurse checked the general's pulse. 4 hours left. But the admiral shook his head. 30 minutes. The antidote you gave him isn't curing the poison. It's catalyzing it. You didn't save him. You turned him into a bomb. The monitors showed black-clad figures moving through the stairwells, not Spetsnaz, not CIA, 3 operators moving with the same economy of motion she'd used in the elevator. The admiral followed her gaze. Your classmates, he said. Cohort 7, you remember them, don't you? The twins from Belarus, the chemist from Austin. They graduated the same day you disappeared. They stayed on, she remembered. The training facility in the Utah desert, the shared barracks, the promise that they would never meet again in the field, because that would mean the program had failed. They're not here to kill me, she said. The admiral's smile faded. No, they're here to harvest you. Reed grabbed her arm. What does he mean? The admiral answered for her. She is the antidote. Literally. The genetic sequence that neutralizes 619er was engineered into her DNA 12 years ago. We needed a walking, talking cure in case the activation got out of hand. Her blood can save the 300 upstairs. All of it. Every drop. The process is terminal. The nurse looked at her hands, the same hands that had synthesized a cure in 20 minutes. She understood now. The math had been too easy. The ingredients too convenient. She had recognized the toxin because she had been designed to counter it. The elevator chimed. The kill team had bypassed the shaft controls. 17 floors to go. The general reached up, grasping her sleeve with surprising strength. Don't, he whispered. Let them burn. Let the program die with me. The admiral laughed softly. Noble to the end, but she isn't yours anymore, old friend. She never was. She looked at Reed, seeing him for the first time, not as an agent, but as a man. Your sister, she said. The one in Kiev, the diplomat's daughter. That was you. Reed nodded once, his jaw tight. You saved her. I never forgot the description. Blonde nurse, no name, no records. I joined the agency to find you, to thank you, or to stop you. I haven't decided which. The elevator dropped another floor. 15 to go. The nurse moved to the lab bench, finding a syringe, then a scalpel, then a surgical drain bag. She filled 3 bags with her own blood, fast, practiced, ignoring the dizziness. It won't be enough, the admiral said. Not for 300. It'll be enough for the ventilation system, she replied. If I aerosolize it. If I get to the intake valves on the roof before they trigger the satellite pulse. The admiral's eyes widened. You'll never make it past the kill team. She sealed the last bag. I won't have to, she turned to Reed. Take these, get to the HVAC control room. If I'm not on the roof in 20 minutes, release it into the air supply anyway. Reed shook his head. You'll be in the building. You'll die with them. She smiled, the first genuine expression in 19 years. Ghosts don't die, Agent Reed. We just fade. She walked toward the elevator shaft, not waiting for the car to arrive. She pried open the doors with her bare hands, looking up into the darkness where her former classmates were descending. She didn't reach for a weapon. She reached for her scrub top, tearing it open to reveal the faded tattoo on her shoulder blade. The ghost orchid symbol. The elevator car was visible now, descending fast, 3 faces she recognized behind tinted visors. She stepped into the shaft, into the empty space between floors, and called out into the darkness. Cohort 7. Class reunion. The car stopped with a screech of brakes, guns raised. She stood unarmed in the half-light, blood bags at her feet, and spread her arms wide. If you want to save the program, she said, you need me alive. but if you want to save your souls, you'll let me climb." The lead operator tilted his head, a gesture she remembered from the desert. Then he reached up and pressed the button that opened the elevator doors. The barrel of his rifle didn't lower, but his finger slid off the trigger. 20 floors to the roof, he said. His voice was distorted by the mask, but she heard the crack in it. "They're waiting for you up there. All of them." She stepped into the car, the doors closing behind her, sealing her inside with the 3 people who knew her real name. As the elevator began to rise, she looked at her reflection in the polished steel, and for the first time in 2 decades, she saw someone looking back. The elevator doors opened onto a wall of rotor wash and Arctic wind. The roof of Walter Reed was a chaos of spinning lights, black tactical gear, and the heavy thrum of a waiting helicopter whose blades carved the night into slices. 12 operatives formed a semicircle around the HVAC intake stack, weapons trained on the elevator, but when they saw who stepped out first, they hesitated. The lead operator from Cohort 7 raised his hand, not in surrender, but in command. "Stand down," he said into his throat mic. "Asset Omega is mission critical." The rifles didn't lower, but the fingers stopped squeezing. She walked forward, blood bags clutched against her chest, her scrubs torn and stained, her bare feet numb against the concrete. The satellite dish on the adjacent roof was rotating, aligning, a silent metal flower blooming toward the stars. 3 minutes to pulse activation. She could see the countdown timer on a portable screen near the helicopter, strapped to the wrist of a man in a flight suit. The Admiral had thought of everything. He was sitting in the cabin, oxygen mask over his face, not from necessity but from theater, directing the final act of his decades-long performance. She reached the intake vents. The fans were spinning at maximum, pulling air from the roof down into the building's arteries, feeding the conference rooms 3 floors below, where 300 lives were breathing in synchronized ignorance. She tore open the first blood bag with her teeth, the copper taste flooding her mouth, and poured it into the intake. The blade splattered it into mist, into aerosol, into a cloud that vanished down the shaft. The second bag, the third. She was growing dizzy, the blood loss hitting her like waves of cold water. Reed's voice crackled from a radio abandoned on an equipment case. "Do it now," he shouted. "I've overridden the dampers, full circulation." She didn't answer. She was watching the satellite dish lock into position. The man with the timer called out, 60 seconds. The Admiral leaned forward in his helicopter throne, watching her through the glass, waiting for her to collapse, to fail, to prove that his design was perfect and her sacrifice was insufficient. The lead operator from Cohort 7 stepped beside her. He removed his helmet. He was younger than he should be, preserved by the same genetic markers that flowed in her veins. "Take this," he said, pressing a 4th bag into her hands. "We drew it in the elevator. Cohort 7 stands with the cure, not the weapon." One by one, the other 2 operators removed their helmets, forming a wall between her and the Admiral's men. The rifles finally lowered, not from orders, but from shame. She poured the 4th bag into the intake. Then she slumped against the metal housing, her vision narrowing to a tunnel. The timer hit 0. The satellite pulse was invisible, a microwave burst that triggered the genetic switches in the toxin, telling it to bloom, to replicate, to attack the adrenal glands of everyone in the building. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ventilation system screamed as her antibodies met the manufactured plague in the dark ducts. A war of microscopic armies fought in the space between breaths. Downstairs in the conference hall, a 3-star general suddenly gripped his chest, gasped, and felt his heart rate spike. Then stabilize. Then slow to a calm, steady rhythm. Across the room, a Navy surgeon felt a wave of heat, then cold, then perfect clarity. The antidote was working, spreading through the air like incense, rewriting the poison's instructions cell by cell. 300 doctors looked at each other, confused, alive, saved by blood they would never know had rained down on them from the roof. On the roof, the Admiral screamed into his radio, but the pilot was already lifting off, unwilling to die for a failed experiment. The helicopter banked sharply, and through the open door, she saw the Admiral's face for the last time, twisted not with rage but with mathematical disappointment, as if she were a theorem that had refused to solve correctly. Then the aircraft vanished into the dark, leaving only the wash of its departure and the sound of approaching sirens. She woke on a gurney, not in the basement this time, but in the same trauma bay where the night had begun. The fluorescent lights were harsh, ordinary, beautiful. Reed stood over her, an IV in her arm, replenishing what she had given away. The general was in the next bed, his hand resting on the rail between them, his eyes open and lucid. "You broke the rules," he whispered. "Ghosts aren't supposed to bleed for the living." She turned her head to look at him. "Someone had to fix your mess, sir." He smiled, a real smile, not the mask of command. "I'm proud of you, Elena." The name hit her like electricity. He hadn't used it in 19 years. He hadn't used it ever in public. Now he said it clearly, deliberately, as if feeding it back into the world. The general died at 4:17 a.m., not from poison, but from the damage his heart had sustained fighting it. He held her hand until the line went flat, and when the nurses covered his face with a sheet, they found a locket clenched in his other hand. Reed opened it. Inside was a photograph of a young woman with blonde hair standing in front of a house in Vermont, and a birth certificate folded small as a flower. The name on the paper was Elena Voss. The date of birth matched the day she had supposedly died. The father was listed as unknown. The mother was a woman who had died in childbirth, a woman whose name she had never known. The FBI found the admiral in a safe house in Annapolis. 3 days later, dead from an apparent suicide, though the single gunshot wound was in the back of his head. Ghost Orchid was dismantled, its files burned, its operators scattered to private security firms and early retirements. The 300 doctors returned to their lives, each one carrying a story about a strange flu symptom at a conference, never knowing they had been the battlefield. She stood in the hospital parking lot 6 weeks later, wearing civilian clothes for the first time in 2 decades, a passport in her pocket with a name she could finally claim. Reed approached, holding a coffee cup. "You could come back," he said. "Advisory role. No more ghosts." She looked at the building where she had died and been reborn in the same night. "I was never a ghost," she said. "I was just waiting for someone to prove I was real." She walked toward the sunrise, and for the first time in 40 years of military intelligence, a woman named Elena Voss left footprints that anyone could follow. The morning light caught her hair as she reached the street corner, turning her into someone ordinary, someone who could fade into any crowd at any coffee shop in any city. But somewhere in a building behind her, 300 people were drawing breath because she had refused to stay invisible when it mattered most. The question haunting counterintelligence offices isn't how many ghosts walk among us, trained to kill and trained to heal in equal measure, bearing identities so erased that even their reflections seem temporary. The question is how many choose to remain hidden when the moment comes to step into the light, and what price we pay as a nation when we ask our best to become shadows. Elena Voss spent 19 years proving she didn't exist on paper, in databases, in memory. It took one night of bleeding on a rooftop, pouring her own life into ventilation shafts, to prove she existed in the only way that truly matters. And in the silence that followed, as the hospital returned to its rhythms of birth and death, as the files burned and the operators scattered to winds that never blow in the same direction twice, the truth settled like dust on windowsills. Some weapons aren't forged from steel or encrypted code or satellite pulses. They're forged from sacrifice, from the willingness to become nothing, to be unmade so that others can remain everything they were meant to be. The general's locket sits in a safe deposit box in Vermont now, the only government-recognized evidence that a woman named Elena was ever born. But the 300 doctors who breathed that morning air, who returned to their families and their surgical theaters, carry something more permanent than paper or photographs. They carry time. They carry the futures they will shape, the lives they will save, the children they will raise, the discoveries they will make, all because one ghost decided that being real was worth the final price. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of her choice or the silence of her 19 years, then don't scroll away. Subscribe not for the algorithm, not for notifications, but for the Elena still walking among us in plain sight, waiting for the moment to step forward. They may not have names we can speak aloud. They may not leave footprints we can photograph, but their marks are everywhere, in every saved life and every quiet sunrise if we only know where to look.